Hi everyone, my name is Vince Gauman. Thank you for being here with me today. I am excited to talk to you about unapologetic living and to introduce you to Mary Magdalene, if you don't know her already, a little bit more, and to invite you to my upcoming ceremony, which is on the 21st of May, Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific. And that's going to be a live transmission from the overlighting presence of Mary Magdalene, the Ascended Master. And one of the things that Mary Magdalene is both known for and not known for is her unapologetic way of living and leading. That's how she lived and led as a spiritual divine feminine Christ embodiment a couple thousand years ago. She was a fierce, bold, brave woman living at a time when there was significant oppression, particularly amongst women, and it was incredibly unsafe for women to walk the streets. And they were treated like slaves in their homes. They were treated like third-class citizens. And Mary Magdalene shone bright, despite what you read in biblical literature. She actually was a fully awakened woman, a fully initiated adept. She went to mystery school traditions in Mesopotamia, in India, in Egypt. She was a powerhouse, and she stood alongside Jesus for 3 years, and they co-led their ministry, offering healing empowerments and initiations to the sick, the poor, the outcasted, the people who were just so tired of being subjugated to the dark rule of both the Romans and the Pharisees. So she really stood out, not just in terms of her contribution, but the fact that she was a woman contributing in that way. And she is deeply misunderstood because religious establishments have purposely portrayed her as a weak, desperate, disempowered woman, prostrate at the knees of Jesus, crying. They portrayed her as a whore. They portrayed her as a sinner of the city. That's actually how they portrayed her, using those words, sinner of the city. You can find that in biblical texts. And, like Mother Mary, she's been defaced. And the church did this because the divine feminine Christ, and specifically women embodying that energy, were a significant threat to them. We're talking about a dark patriarchal era, a dark patriarchal reign of the Romans and the Pharisees. And the last thing they want, they don't want anyone who they can't control, standing on top of hills talking. They don't want anyone they can't control. Hence Jesus being crucified. But they certainly don't want a woman. Because if you have a liberated woman standing up and speaking out and healing and leading empowerments and liberating people, well, then that's going to make a lot of women who should be subjugated to male domination. That's going to make a lot of women think twice about how they are treated and if they should stand up for themselves and taking a stand for their dignity and their worth and their right to be treated as an equal. So Mary Magdalene was highly unusual. She really rocked it. She really rocked the stage back then. And so it's a real honor for me to lead the ceremony with her. And what's going to happen is that people who come to this online ceremony receive a direct transmission from her, a healing and empowerment transmission, just like you would have 2,000 years ago. So I want to talk about unapologetic living. And what does that mean? So unapologetic living means being aligned in your truth. It means being aligned in your sovereignty. It means not compromising yourself. The what we do in our society is we learn to turn away from ourselves. We learn to turn our back on who we are because it's not safe to be who we are. We learn at a young age to essentially apologize for who we are. And one of the first things that we learn to apologize for is actually being afraid. We learn it's not safe to be afraid. It's not safe to have big feelings. And so what we learn to do at a young age is to become, and I've said this before in many videos, we learn to be compartmentalized. We stuff different parts of ourselves down. But we learn that it's not safe to be human in many ways. We learn that it's not safe to be emotional, to feel. And that includes to feel afraid and to feel sad. And in my conversations with Mary Magdalene, one of the things that she emphasized to me is that during her time of leadership, she wasn't invincible. Yeah, she was an empowered woman. She was a spiritual leader. Yes, she was awakened, and yes, she was a fully initiated adept. But she wasn't invincible. She was and you may relate to this as a strong empath. She felt deeply for the amount of suffering, the magnitude of suffering around her, particularly of women. She was affected by that. She took that to heart. So how could you not, as a very sensitive woman? So, so she said to me, she said I wasn't invincible. And so what she was basically saying was, being a leader does not mean that you're not deeply vulnerable, that you're not afraid, that you don't have big feelings. And so we learn at a young age that that it's not safe to have big feelings. It's not safe to feel fully. And the thing is that we forget that when we come into this world, what's the first thing we do when we come into this world, when we first, arrive? We are wet, we are red, we are wild, and we are weeping. We are weeping raw, big, loud. We arrive emotional. We arrive unbridled, unapologetic. You see, that's our nature. We come here unapologetic. We arrive unapologetic, right? And we forget that. That's the template right there. That's the template for who we are, is wet, raw, wild, weeping, real, unapologetic. We forget that. For some reason, it's okay for a newborn to be that, to be unapologetic in that way. It's okay. But for some reason, when you're 3 years old, it's less okay. And when you're 7 years old, it's even less okay. And when you're 15 years old, even less. And when you're 30, even less. And if you're a boy/man, even less so. You got to keep it together. You need to be strong. And so a big part of being unapologetic is embracing your raw humanity. You see, this is the thing about being in the human experience, is that by the very nature of having a body, we are vulnerable. By the very nature of having a body, we are vulnerable, because we are subject to pain. We are subject to emotion. We are subject to sickness. We are subject to heartbreak. We are subjected to decay, and we are subjected to death. That's pretty vulnerable. We're subjected to being hurt. We're subjected to suffering. That's the thing, though. See, this is the great teaching, is that we've come here not to avoid our humanity, but to be humbled in our humanity. We've actually come here to learn to be afraid, not to avoid being afraid. We've come here to actually at some point say, oh God, I'm afraid. I feel terrified. To actually feel that. There's a lot of spiritual beliefs out there that say, the journey of healing empowerment is about overcoming fear. I say actually the journey of healing and empowerment is actually learning to live with fear, learning to love fear, and learning to walk with it side by side into your living, into your leadership, into your unapologetic way of being in the world. It's not about avoiding it. You get to be afraid. How cool is that? You get to include it. And you don't have to apologize for being afraid. Like for me, like I feel fear pretty much every day. Like can't remember the last time I had a day without feeling afraid of something. You know, there's fear for me in creating this video. Am I going to do a good job? It's a big deal for me to represent Mary Magdalene. You know, I was vulnerable before creating this video. I was talking to Mary Magdalene, asking her for some support. You know, I cry almost every day. I am a very sensitive person, and you know, there's a lot of transformation that I've had to go through and that I'm still going through to be able to transmit these healing rays from Mary Magdalene and Kuan Yin and Mother Mary and Green Tara, etc., and the spirit animals I work with. So I can try not to be afraid. I can try not to be vulnerable. Or I can say, you know what? I love my raw humanity. I love that I'm a mess sometimes. I love that I'm being humbled through this process, because in that I'm more relatable. There's a safety I feel I give my clients by actually showing that I'm human too, and I'm not just like a highly elevated, unreachable being that that is better or more, you know, more in some ways. So this is the thing. We come to this planet to learn to be human and to embrace all that comes with being human, all the messiness that comes, and to be humbled through that experience. That's what the thing about the human experience, it is such a powerful teacher for us. There's so much wisdom in embracing our fear and making fear perfectly okay. You know, so the next time you feel afraid about something, I invite you to actually say to yourself on some level, it's okay to be afraid. Love your fear. See that your fear is opening you up to your vulnerability. And in opening up to your vulnerability, you're actually opening up to your power. Because power and vulnerability are two sides of the same coin. Power and vulnerability are two sides of the same coin. So we find strength in our vulnerability. We find wisdom in our heartbreak. And again, I cannot tell you how much I have had to face my fears in doing this work. You know, it's really vulnerable. And it's very edgy for me to do the work I'm doing. The amount of thresholds I've had to cross, thresholds of vulnerability to heal myself and empower myself, and to heal people with Starlight, and heal people with Mother Mary, and heal people with Mary Magdalene, to transmit the rays of Kuan Yin, to, you know, transmit the rays of Diamond Light, to quit and walk away from pretty much my entire life to do this work, to step into the unknown again and again. Do you know how many times I've had to face fear to do that? And so it is an invitation, this video, to not be apologetic in your vulnerability, to not be apologetic in your humanity, to honor the rawness of you and include it in your life. Take time to feel how you're feeling. Take time to sit with and be with the emotional storms in your body, and to be aware of any beliefs in you that say you shouldn't be feeling afraid. Another thing I want to say is, unapologetic is also about, you don't have to apologize for standing out as a wild person. You don't have to apologize for being outstanding, for standing out, for being bold, for speaking out, for having a big imagination. So it's not just emotions, it's not just fear. It's about you get to be you. You get to be you in your wild imagination. And how many times are we told we're too much? How many times are we told that our imagination is too much and we should be realistic? Or we're too spontaneous, we need to tone it down. Right? So if you look at the people who've been, the great leaders like Jesus or Gandhi or Martin Luther King, they were killed because they stood out and they were uncontrollable. So we have a history in our society, in our culture, in this world, and we have memory imprints in our DNA from past lives of being punished for standing out too much, for being too much of ourselves. And so it can be scary because we may have these old imprints of memory from past lives in ourselves that say, don't stand out too much. Don't be too much of you. I lived in England for a while, and they had this saying, tall poppy choppers. And that is, if a poppy grew too high, someone would knock the head off of the poppy. Don't stand out too much. Don't be too wild. Isadora Duncan said, you were wild once, don't let them tame you. Children are wild. Wild is related to the word will. And there's a history in the way children have been educated, specifically in Protestant correctional institutions, where if a child was too wild, it meant they were too willful. And the church did not want willful children, so they beat them brutally. They beat them because a willful child is going to go to hell, and they don't want the child going to hell, so they're going to beat them to make sure they don't go to hell. So, we have been raised, we've been educated to stuff down our wildness, to stuff down our emotional body. We've been standardized in the standardized education system. We've been molded to fit in at the cost of belonging. Fitting in is not the same thing as belonging. When you have to fit in, you automatically have to lose some part of your authenticity. You can't fit in without having to give up something of yourself. But belonging is about all of myself. All of me belongs. I belong. All of me is welcome. And that's the thing, was when I work with Mary Magdalene, it's like, you belong. Your emotions belong. Your fears belong. Your dreams belong. Your concerns belong. All of you belongs. And that's why Mary Magdalene said to me, I wasn't invincible. Yes, I was a spiritual leader, but I wasn't invincible. So she's basically saying, my vulnerability belonged. It belonged in my human experience. It belonged in my spiritual leadership. She included it. Her humanity belonged. So our place of belonging actually is in the body. Our place of belonging is when we get to inhabit our body and when it's okay to be human in our body and to have our full human experiences, whether that is emotion or imagination or spontaneity or curiosity. Children are super curious, but they soon learn that it's not safe to ask too many questions. You see, the thing is once we're educated to know The more we know, we lose our curiosity because we're graded and valued based on how much information we have versus how much curiosity we have. Because the thing with curiosity is, to truly be curious, you need to not know. You can't be curious and know at the same time. You have to let go of knowing to be curious. And so, we lose our curiosity. And then therefore we may be apologetic later in life around being too curious, about asking too many questions. And so if you ever do work with Mary Magdalene, if you ever do work with any ascended masters or spirit guides, and you feel yourself asking a lot of very personal questions or vulnerable questions or questions about the cosmos or life, you may catch yourself being apologetic for asking a lot of questions. You may say, I'm asking too many questions. But I've never experienced that with Mary Magdalene, that I'm being too much in my curiosity, that I'm being too much in anything. All is welcome, all of me belongs. And that's what Mary Magdalene wants for you to know, is that you get to be unapologetic in your living and your leading, in how you show up moment to moment. You get to be unapologetic. You get to be fully you. You get to belong. All parts of you gets to belong. Your fear, your shame, your sadness, your anger, your confusion, your joy, your curiosity, spontaneity, imagination, the impulses to risk take, the impulses to dream, your sexuality. That's a big topic, right? We can go to the church again. The suppression of sexuality, making sexuality a sin. How much have we had to be apologetic for being a sexual person, a sexual being? That's another thing that Mary Magdalene can help with, is healing any trauma imprints around sexuality. Either that comes from shame that you have towards your sexuality, or trauma imprints that come from sexual abuse, sexual trauma. So the message here is, you get to be you. You get to be fully you. This is about being alive. This is what it means to be alive. Alive means I'm in my body, I'm feeling, I'm speaking my truth, I'm acting from my heart, I'm weeping, I'm crying. That means to be alive. When I feel anger, I'm going to let myself feel angry. Mary Magdalene felt outrage at the way women were treated. In allowing yourself to feel that, that's her being alive. Aliveness means you honor your feeling body. Right? It's not about being super spiritual and bypassing your body. It's about you honoring all of you. So there's a relationship between being alive and being unapologetic. There's a relationship between being alive and fully you. Fully you. Being alive and being that newborn infant, that baby. That's aliveness, everyone. Raw, wet, wild, weeping, red, right? The newborn. That's aliveness. That, you look at a newborn, that's raw aliveness. That's who we are. Indigenous cultures get this. That's why they have grieving rituals. They know how to grieve. They have ceremonies around. They're drumming, dancing. They know how to grieve. We've forgotten how to grieve in this society. We've forgotten how to feel deeply. I've had many clients come to me and say, hey, can you help me? Can you help heal my grief? And I say, I'm not here to heal your grief. I may help heal the pain in your body that's underlying the grief, but ultimately living with grief and learning to feel grief and learning to walk with grief, just like fear, is a life skill. It's a life skill to live with grief. It's a life skill to feel. It's not about getting rid of grief. It's about feeling it fully, is honoring it as part of your human experience and finding the learning and the richness in being a fully feeling, raw, humble person. Grief humbles us and it breaks our heart open. And what a wonderful thing that is. So, this is a ceremony that's, what do I have there? The 21st of May, Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific. It's 75 minutes, it's 77 Canadian. You can attend it whether you're on Zoom or not. So, if you can't make it, you can still get the transmission and you will get it with no less power than if you were actually on the Zoom call. And like I said, you are getting a transmission from Mary Magdalene just like you would have 2,000 years ago. A healing empowerment transmission, an initiation into your soul. Initiation essentially means remembrance, remembering who you are. So all that's going to be in the description. So thank you so much for listening to me. On behalf of Mary Magdalene, it's a real honor to share this information with you and to invite you to honor your humanity more and to live and lead from your unapologetic self. And please subscribe, please share, please leave your comments. Thank you, everyone.